Sarah Hunter had always been proud of her home. Inherited from her late mother, the house stood like a monument to the past, a towering Victorian structure that loomed over Maplewood Street. Despite its age, the house had a comforting sense of stability to it, with its intricate woodwork, grand staircase, and wide windows that let in the sunlight on warm afternoons. But even the most comforting spaces can hold dark secrets. It had been a few months since her mother's passing, and Sarah had moved back into the house to settle her affairs and make decisions about what to do with it. After years of living in the city, Sarah had forgotten just how eerie the house could be. Even the quiet was unsettling. Every floorboard creaked, and every gust of wind seemed to carry with it a sense of impending change. That morning, Sarah had been sorting through boxes in the basement. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was necessary. She was trying to get the space ready for a storage overhaul when her hand brushed against something cold in the corner of the room. At first, she thought it was just the remnants of some old furniture, but as she cleared away the dust, something felt off. Her flashlight beam revealed what looked like a faint outline of a door, hidden beneath layers of old wood panels. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't part of the basement she remembered. With a mix of curiosity and hesitation, Sarah approached the wall. She ran her fingers along the seams of the panels, feeling the cold wood beneath her touch. Was this always here? She had lived in the house for years, and she was certain she had never noticed this space before. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't ignore it. There was something compelling about it, something urging her to discover what lay behind the door. With a firm grip, she pried at the panels. They came off easily, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. What could this be? She wondered, her mind racing. Was it some kind of old storage space or forgotten cellar? She felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to step forward. Her hand trembled as she turned on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The stairs creaked beneath her as she descended, the air growing colder the further she went. It was the kind of cold that clung to your skin, like the house itself was hiding something. At the bottom of the stairs, Sarah's flashlight revealed a small, dimly lit room. It was cramped, with shelves cluttered with dust-covered boxes and strange, forgotten objects. But what caught her attention the most was the wall at the far end of the room. A series of newspaper clippings were pinned to the wood, the edges curled and yellowed with age. She stepped forward, her heart racing as she read the first headline. Local Girl Missing. The search for Lily Matthews intensifies. The name sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Lily Matthews, the young girl who had gone missing from the neighborhood a decade ago. The case had shocked the town. Her disappearance remained unsolved, and the girl's family was left devastated by the unanswered questions. The next headline sent a wave of unease through Sarah's chest. Foul play suspected in disappearance of young girl. Authorities investigate family ties in disappearance of Lily Matthews. Sarah's fingers trembled as she scanned the articles, each one revealing more disturbing information. The Matthews family had lived in the house across the street from Sarah's own. She had known them when she was a child, but Lily Matthews had been younger than Sarah, and they had never been close. T was the last article that made Sarah's blood run cold. The headline read, Missing Girl's Last Known Location, 2214 Maplewood Street. That was her house. Her breath caught in her throat as the pieces began to fall into place. Her house, the very house she had grown up in, had a connection to Lily Matthews's disappearance. But how? Why had she never known about this? And why had the room been hidden from her all these years? Before Sarah could process the overwhelming information, something caught her eye on the floor. A small, faded photograph, half covered by dust. She knelt down to pick it up, her fingers brushing against the glossy surface. The photo showed Lily Matthews, smiling in front of her family's house. But that wasn't what made Sarah's heart stop. What made her freeze was the second figure in the photo, standing just behind Lily. It was a man, blurry in the background, his face partially obscured by shadow. The man was wearing a dark coat, and his presence felt wrong. He seemed out of place, an unsettling addition to what should have been a carefree family photo. Suddenly, everything felt too still. The air in the basement was thick with the weight of the unanswered questions, and Sarah's stomach twisted as she wondered what had been hidden in this room, in her house, all these years. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination running wild. After all, this wasn't the first time she had come across something strange in the house. It was old, and old houses always had their quirks. But the more she thought about the photograph, the more she realized something wasn't adding up. The discovery of the hidden room in the basement was just the beginning. The photograph was the first real clue, and she couldn't ignore it. She needed answers, but where could she even begin? Her first thought was to contact the police, but as soon as she picked up the phone, her hand wavered. The last thing she wanted was to involve the authorities without more concrete proof. No, she needed to investigate on her own first. This wasn't just about the disappearance of Lily Matthews. It was about uncovering the truth about her own family. She had heard rumors over the years, small whispers of unusual behavior and strange events surrounding her family, but nothing that had ever seemed significant. Now, everything felt like it was falling into place. Her father, the mysterious man in the photograph, and the secret room in the basement. Sarah decided she would begin by searching through her father's things. After all, if anyone knew anything about this hidden past, it would be him. But her father had passed away over a decade ago in a car accident. She never thought to question it, until now. As she dug through old boxes in the attic, she came across her father's journals. They were leather-bound, dusty, and worn, but they contained years of thoughts, reflections, and memories. She carefully flipped through the pages, scanning for any mention of Lily Matthews or anything that could explain the strange connection to the case. What she found next would change everything. The air in the attic was stale, filled with the scent of old paper and forgotten memories. Dust particles floated in the faint light that filtered through a small window high on the wall, casting long, shadowy lines across the room. Sarah felt the weight of the journals in her hands, the leather cracked and worn, but they held something far more valuable than nostalgia: secrets. Her father had always been a private man, a man of few words, and as a child, Sarah had always assumed that silence was just part of his personality. Now, in the quiet solitude of the attic, she wondered if it was something more, a way of hiding what he knew. The first journal she picked up was small, bound in soft brown leather. She flipped it open to the first page, the faint ink still legible. It was dated several years before her father's death. April 3rd, 1998. The house feels empty now. Sarah and her mother have gone for the weekend, and the silence is deafening. It's been a few months since the last time I saw Lily, but I can't stop thinking about her. It's as if her disappearance has haunted me from the moment I laid eyes on her. I need to stop looking over my shoulder, but I can't help it. I wonder if they'll ever find her. Sarah felt a chill race through her as she read the entry. Lily. Her father had known her. More than that, he seemed troubled by her disappearance, something that wasn't public knowledge. She turned the page quickly, eager to learn more. The next few pages were filled with short, cryptic entries. April 15th, 1998. It's been weeks, and the house still feels heavy. Sarah hasn't noticed, but I can see her start to change. She's withdrawn, as if the air in this house is different now. I'm trying to keep things normal, but the shadow of Lily's disappearance is hanging over us. There are whispers at work, whispers about connections to the family. I've been doing my best to keep it out of my mind, but it's getting harder. Sarah paused, her hands trembling. Connections to the family? What did that mean? Her thoughts were interrupted as she flipped another page. This one dated the summer before her father's death. July 3rd, 2003. They came to see me again today. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I don't know who they think I am or what they expect of me. But I won't tell them anything. I can't. It's over now. There's nothing left to find. If they can't see that, then they'll never understand. I'll protect Sarah, no matter what. This is the last entry. I can't write anymore." The finality of the words made Sarah's stomach drop. Who were they? And what had her father meant by protect Sarah? There were too many questions. Questions that she didn't have the answers to, but that she needed to find. Sarah closed the journal, her mind racing. What had her father been involved in? And why had he left these cryptic entries behind? There was something he had known, something he had been hiding, and now it was up to Sarah to uncover the truth. Her hands were shaking as she returned the journal to its place in the box and grabbed another. This one was larger, more formal in appearance, with a deep, dark burgundy cover. She opened it carefully, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages as she sought any mention of Lily or the strange connection to her father's death. The entries in this journal were far more detailed, written in a meticulous hand that matched the careful way her father had conducted himself in life. The first pages spoke of his work and his life at the time, but as Sarah flipped forward, the tone changed. December 12, 1997. I met with Thomas again today. He insisted we discuss the past. I don't want to go back there, but he won't stop. He's adamant that I need to be part of it again. He believes we can finish what we started, but I won't. I won't get involved again. It's too dangerous. Thomas. The name stuck with Sarah. Who was Thomas, and what had they started together? This wasn't just a regular meeting. This was something much deeper, something dangerous. But what could it be? She read on. December 23, 1997. Lily Matthews came by the house today. She was acting strange, more anxious than usual. She said she was scared that someone was watching her. She wouldn't say who, but I know it's the same people who are after me. I tried to reassure her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I can't help her. I'm too far in. I can't let anyone else get involved. Not Sarah. Not Lily. But I'm afraid it's too late. They'll never stop. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Her father had known Lily well enough to be afraid for her, but he had chosen not to help. Why? And who were they that her father was so terrified of? Her fingers flew to the next page, desperate for more answers. January 5, 1998. The police are involved now. They're getting too close. I've already made my decision. There's no turning back now. I'll protect Sarah, no matter the cost. I can't trust anyone anymore, not even my own wife. She'll never understand. Sarah's heart pounded. Her own wife? Was this a reference to her mother? Had her father known something about her mother that he never shared with her? She could feel the darkness in her father's words, a weight that had never lifted. Whatever had happened before Sarah was born, whatever had tied her father to the Matthews family, it was something that had destroyed him from the inside out. It was clear now. Her father had been involved in something much more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. There was a conspiracy, a hidden world of fear, lies, and betrayal. And somehow, Sarah was tangled in it all. She couldn't stop thinking about the final journal entry. I'll protect Sarah, no matter what. But what exactly had he been trying to protect her from? The walls of the house seemed to close in around her as she processed the information. She needed to know more. She needed to find out who Thomas was, who they were, and what her father had really been hiding. But she also needed to know what role she played in all of this. Was she the target of whatever her father had been involved in? As she stared at the journals in front of her, Sarah realized one thing. She couldn't do this alone. She had to contact someone who could help her navigate the terrifying truth. And there was only one person she trusted with her life: Detective Laura Evans. It was time to call in reinforcements. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the phone in her hand, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She had spent hours reading her father's journals, each page more revealing than the last. But with every discovery, The questions piled up, each more confusing and terrifying than the last. Who was Thomas? Who were they? And why had her father been so involved with Lily Matthews' family? What had been so dangerous that he had to hide it from her mother, and from her? She needed answers, and there was only one person who might help her now: Detective Laura Evans. Laura had been a family friend for years, a trusted presence in Sarah's life. She had worked on the case of Lily Matthews' disappearance when it first happened, but despite the thorough investigation, the case had gone cold. Like so many others, the mystery of what happened to Lily had been pushed to the back of the public's mind, but Sarah knew that Laura was still haunted by it, just as she was now. With a deep breath, Sarah dialed the number. The phone rang once, then twice before it was picked up. Evans. "Laura," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's Sarah, Hunter. I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a slow exhale. "What's going on, Sarah? You sound shaken." I think I've uncovered something. Something about Lily Matthews' disappearance. And my father," Sarah said, her words tumbling out. "There's a connection, a dangerous one. I don't know where else to turn." Laura's voice softened. "You're telling me you found something about Lily that's tied to your father? I thought you said your father died in a car accident. What do you mean?" I didn't know everything," Sarah said, her voice catching in her throat, "but I've been going through some of his old journals, and what I've found, it's not just about Lily. It's about something bigger, something my father was involved in, something that could be linked to her disappearance. I don't know how deep this goes, Laura." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Laura spoke, her tone steady but firm. "Sarah, you need to be careful. Whatever you found, it sounds like it's part of something that's much bigger than you realize. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I don't care," Sarah said, the determination in her voice growing. "I need to know the truth. I need to understand why my father kept this hidden from me and what it has to do with Lily. I'm afraid it's connected to the things he was trying to protect me from." Laura sighed, the sound heavy with experience. "All right, meet me at my office in an hour. Bring whatever you found. I can't promise I can make any sense of this, but I'll help you figure it out. But you have to promise me something, Sarah." "What?" "You stay out of it until we can get more information. Promise me that you won't try to dig any deeper without my help." Sarah hesitated, but then nodded. "I promise." Sarah arrived at Detective Evans' office an hour later, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. Laura's office was small but efficient, with a bulletin board covered in photographs and case files. The walls were lined with shelves of records, some of which seemed to date back decades. It felt like the kind of place where dark secrets were kept, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something she wasn't prepared to face. Laura was waiting for her when she arrived. She stood up from behind her desk and gestured for Sarah to take a seat. "All right, let's get started," Laura said, her voice calm but focused. "What do you have?" Sarah pulled out the leather-bound journals her father had kept, the same journals that had revealed the dark truths she was now trying to understand. She placed them on the desk in front of Laura, who took them into her hands carefully as though handling something fragile. "These are my father's journals," Sarah said. "I found them in the attic. He was hiding things, Laura. I think he knew more than he ever told me." Laura flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the entries with a practiced look of concentration. As she read, her face remained impassive, but Sarah could see the small tightening of her jaw, the recognition of something dangerous. "Your father was involved in something bigger than I realized," Laura said quietly, closing the journal. "There's a lot here I don't understand yet, but I've seen this before. People don't get this deep into something unless there's a lot at stake. Your father was trying to protect you, maybe from people who were more dangerous than you know." Sarah nodded. "That's what I think, too." But what was he protecting me from? And why did he have so many connections to Lily Matthews? What could my family possibly have to do with her disappearance? Laura leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping against the desk as she thought. Lily's disappearance was one of the biggest cases I worked on when I was with the department. We never could find any solid leads, just rumors. The Matthews family didn't exactly cooperate with us either. But I've always wondered, why was she at your house? And why would your father be involved? I don't know, Sarah whispered. But my father's journals mention Thomas. He said Thomas was involved in whatever happened to Lily. Who is he, Laura? And why did my father think he was so dangerous? Laura's face grew tight, and she looked away for a moment as if gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was low and measured. Thomas is someone who's been connected to a lot of things in this town. Things people don't talk about. He's not someone who leaves a trail, and the kind of people he deals with don't like to be found. Is he still around? Sarah asked, her voice rising with urgency. I don't know, Laura said, but I'll look into it. I can check some of the old case files. I'll also see if I can dig into any information about your father's connections to him. But I need you to be careful, Sarah. This could be more dangerous than you realize. You have to trust me on this. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Dangerous. The word hung in the air like a warning she hadn't yet fully understood. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't stop now. Her father's secrets, the truth about Lily Matthews, and the hidden room in her basement were all connected, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter what it took. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. After her meeting with Detective Laura Evans, the sense of urgency had only grown stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling that every step she took uncovered more danger, more questions that needed to be answered, and each discovery seemed to bring her closer to something dark, something horrifying, that her father had tried so hard to protect her from. Laura had promised to dig deeper into the case, to search through the old files and try to trace the connections to Thomas. But Sarah couldn't sit idle. Her curiosity and her fear kept her up at night, driving her to look for answers on her own. The more she thought about her father's journals, the more she felt like she was missing something crucial, something buried just beneath the surface. She spent hours combing through the house, through rooms that felt too familiar, too safe, to hold any more secrets. The basement, the attic, the hidden room. All of it felt like a trap, pulling her deeper into a mystery that was beginning to feel like a nightmare. But it wasn't just the house that felt suffocating. It was the town. The small town where she had grown up, the place where everyone knew everyone, and yet no one seemed to know anything. Everyone had their stories, their whispers, their secrets, and it was becoming clearer that Lily Matthews' disappearance wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last, if Sarah didn't uncover the truth. It was late one evening when Sarah received the call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end sent a chill through her body. It's me. Laura's voice crackled through the receiver. I've got some news. We need to meet. This is bigger than we thought. Sarah's pulse quickened. What is it? I can't explain it over the phone. Just meet me at the old diner on 5th. We'll talk there. Trust me. The call ended abruptly, and Sarah was left with a sense of dread tightening in her chest. Whatever Laura had discovered, it wasn't good. The diner on 5th Street was a small, run-down place that Sarah had driven past countless times in her life. It had always been quiet, with a few regulars sitting in booths, sipping coffee and talking about the weather or whatever small-town gossip was making the rounds. But tonight, the diner felt different. The neon sign buzzed faintly, and the atmosphere inside was thick with tension. Laura was sitting in a booth near the back, her face pale and drawn, her eyes scanning the room nervously. When Sarah sat down across from her, Laura didn't waste any time. She slid a manila envelope across the table, her hands steady despite the obvious strain in her voice. "Open it," Laura said softly. Sarah felt her stomach twist as she opened the envelope, pulling out several sheets of paper. They were case files, old ones. Most of them were stamped with the words confidential and do not release. As she scanned through them, her eyes stopped on the first line of one particular document. Case file, missing person, Lily Matthews. This was the case Sarah had heard about for years, the one that had haunted the town, the one that had never been solved. But the information inside these files, it wasn't what Sarah expected. The papers detailed not just Lily's disappearance, but a string of other missing persons cases dating back decades, cases that, until now, had been filed away and forgotten. And at the center of each case was the same name, Thomas. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Thomas was tied to all of them. Laura noticed her reaction. "You're starting to see it, aren't you? Thomas isn't just some guy from the past. He's been involved in more disappearances than we ever realized. And, from what I've found, it's not just him. It's a network, a group. And they've been operating here for a long time." Sarah's mind raced as she flipped through the files, her eyes skimming over the details. The dates were years apart, but the connections were undeniable. Each case, each missing person, had a link to Lily Matthews and to someone in the town who had remained in the shadows. "You said your father knew him." "Thomas," Laura continued, "from what I've gathered, he was part of this group. He was involved in some sort of underground network, and it's clear that he was working with people in the town, people you might know, people I might know." Sarah felt a pit form in her stomach. So, my father wasn't just hiding Lily's disappearance. He was hiding something bigger, a whole operation. But why? What did they want with Lily? And why my family? "I don't know," Laura said, leaning forward, "but I have a theory, and I need your help to prove it. If we can get close enough to the right people, we might be able to find out what they were really after. But we have to be careful. They're dangerous, Sarah. You're not just dealing with a missing persons case anymore. You're dealing with something much bigger than that." Sarah nodded, the weight of the truth sinking in. Her father had been involved in something so much darker than she could have ever imagined. And now, it was her turn to uncover what had been buried for so long. The investigation was no longer just about a missing girl. It was about a secret network operating within the town, a group that had been pulling strings in the shadows for decades. And Sarah was at the heart of it, just as much a part of their plans as anyone else who had ever disappeared. Laura's theory was clear now. Thomas wasn't just a name in a file. He was the key to everything. But Sarah knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed to get closer to the people involved, learn everything she could about this hidden world. But that meant stepping into the darkness. The first step was simple. Go back to the house. The hidden room in the basement, the one that started it all, had more to reveal. Sarah was sure of it now. The house wasn't just the place where her family lived. It was a vault, holding the key to everything. With renewed resolve, Sarah headed back home. The house stood before Sarah, as imposing as ever, but now it felt like a fortress, guarding its secrets. The creaky floorboards, the winding staircases, and the hidden rooms, all of it felt like a trap. She had been drawn into a web of lies, fear, and deception, and now every part of the house seemed to echo with the weight of the past. She couldn't escape the feeling that every step she took was pulling her deeper into something that was much darker than she had ever imagined. But she couldn't turn back now. The truth was out there, somewhere in the house, and she had to find it, no matter what. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she stood in front of the front door. It was Laura. "I've got something," Laura's voice said, urgency in her tone. "I found out where Thomas has been hiding. We need to move fast. I'm sending you the address now." Sarah glanced down at the message that had just popped up on her phone. A location on the outskirts of town, near an old abandoned warehouse. It was marked with a single word: Safe House. Her heart began to race. This was it. They were getting closer to Thomas, and closer to the people who had been behind Lily Matthews's disappearance and the many others who had vanished without a trace. "Meet me there," Laura continued, "but stay low. Don't trust anyone. I'm not far behind." Sarah pocketed the phone and took one last look at her house before stepping inside. The air felt cold, almost oppressive, as if the house was holding its breath. She could almost hear the house whispering its secrets to her, urging her to uncover the truth buried beneath its walls. The basement was the first place Sarah headed. She had to see it again, the room that had started this entire investigation. The hidden door, the strange items, the newspaper clippings, all of it had been too much to ignore. It had to hold more answers. She had already scoured the room several times, but every time she came back it felt like something was just out of reach. This time, she would find it. The stairs creaked underfoot as Sarah descended into the basement. The air smelled musty, the dampness thick in the corners, but it was the corner of the room that caught her attention. The cluttered shelves that had once been filled with abandoned boxes now felt oddly deliberate, too precise to be just old junk. She moved toward the far wall where the newspaper clippings had been pinned, but as she reached for one of them, something caught her eye. A small crack in the wall. It was almost imperceptible, like a slight dent in the surface, but Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Could this be another hidden space? Her fingers brushed against the crack, and with a subtle push, the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage that led deeper into the foundation of the house. A cold rush of air poured through the crack, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. This wasn't just an old basement anymore. It was a labyrinth, and somewhere inside this house she was sure there was an answer to everything. Her hand trembled as she reached for the flashlight, her breath shallow. The passageway was tight, and the walls were close, almost as if the house itself was trying to keep her out. The deeper she went, the more the sense of unease grew, until it felt like the walls were closing in on her. The flashlight illuminated a room ahead, but it was different from the other spaces she had explored. This one was pristine, untouched by time. The furniture was old, but arranged as though someone had been living here recently. An old chair by a fireplace, a rug that was too clean for the rest of the house, but what stood out the most was the large iron safe built into the wall. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The safe had been placed here deliberately, hidden away from view, locked away from the world. This was it, the secret her father had been hiding. With steady hands, she approached the safe and tried the handle. Locked. Her fingers ran over the cold metal, searching for a clue. She didn't have the key, but her mind flashed back to something from her father's journals. A strange, cryptic note. The key is closer than you think. Trust the past. What did it mean? The key. Closer than you think. The words echoed in her mind like a riddle. Sarah turned, looking around the small room for any other clues. Her eyes landed on an old bookcase, its shelves lined with dusty books and a few old photographs. She moved closer, pulling a few of the books from their places. The last book on the shelf was heavier than the rest, and as she pulled it free, a small object fell from between the pages. A key. The key was old, with intricate engravings on its surface. She felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized it was the key to the safe. She rushed back to the iron safe, her hands trembling as she slid the key into the lock. There was a soft click, and the door swung open. Inside the safe, there were more files, documents, photographs, and an old map of the town. But it was the final photograph that stopped Sarah in her tracks. It was a photograph of a man, Thomas. But there was more. Beside him stood her father, smiling, shaking hands in front of a building that Sarah didn't recognize. The address on the back of the photo was marked clearly, Safe House, 7th Avenue. The same safe house that Laura had sent her to. Her father had been involved with Thomas, directly, and now she had proof. Suddenly, the door behind her creaked and Sarah spun around. She hadn't been alone. Looking for something? Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the dim light. He stepped forward slowly, and Sarah felt a cold chill sweep through the room. She froze. The man was familiar, but she couldn't place him at first. It didn't take long before she recognized him. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A smirk curled across his lips. "You've been digging too deep, Sarah. I warned you not to get involved, but now I see you're just like your father, always poking around where you don't belong." Sarah felt a surge of panic. How did he know? How long had he been watching her? "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. "I want you to leave," Thomas said, his voice low and menacing. "The truth doesn't belong to you. It never did. Your father understood that. But you've made a mistake. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences." The air seemed to thicken around her, the weight of the situation pressing down. She knew she couldn't escape him. Not now. "Where's Laura?" Sarah asked, trying to steady her breathing. "She's coming here. She'll expose you. She knows everything." Thomas chuckled darkly. "Oh, she'll be here soon enough. But you're too late. The pieces are already in place. Your father was right. You can't stop it. No one can." The walls felt like they were closing in, the truth slipping further from her grasp. She had no choice now but to face whatever was coming next. Sarah uncovers a hidden room in her house that contains crucial evidence linking her father to Thomas and the secret network behind the disappearances. The shocking photograph of her father and Thomas together confirms her father's involvement, and Sarah is confronted by Thomas himself in the basement, making it clear that the stakes are higher than ever. The air in the basement was thick with tension, each breath heavier than the last. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as Thomas stepped into the small room, his dark eyes locked onto hers. The flashlight in Sarah's hand flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls, as if the house itself was alive and watching them. "I knew you'd find it eventually," Thomas said, his voice cold and unfeeling. "Your father was always too trusting, too naive. He thought he could keep you safe, but all he did was lead you straight to me." Sarah's mind raced, trying to process the revelation that the man standing before her was directly involved in her father's dark past. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with fear. Thomas smiled, a cold, almost predatory grin. "What I want doesn't matter. It's what your father wanted that matters. You see, he wasn't just hiding from me. He was hiding from a lot of people. People who know too much. People who understand what we've been doing here for years." Sarah shook her head, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and horror. What had her father been involved in? She had thought the hidden room, the journals, and the clippings were the end of it, but now it seemed like they were only the beginning. She had barely scratched the surface of her family's involvement in this dark network, and now Thomas was standing before her, like some twisted piece of the puzzle she wasn't prepared to solve. "Your father wasn't just a victim, Sarah," Thomas continued, his voice lowering as he stepped closer. "He was a part of something much bigger. A network, you could call it. A group of powerful people with control over the things that matter most. And now, you're a part of it too." Sarah took a step back, her mind racing. Powerful people? It all made sense now. The missing persons, the secrets buried deep in the town, and her father, trying to protect her from it all, but somehow still being a part of it. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "My father wasn't part of this. He was trying to protect me. He never wanted this. He never wanted you." Thomas's smile faltered for a moment before he chuckled darkly. "You're naive, Sarah. You think your father was some kind of hero, some innocent man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? You have no idea what he was really doing, what he was really protecting you from." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Everything she had believed about her father, the man she had loved and respected, was unraveling before her. He hadn't just been hiding secrets. He had been part of something far more dangerous. "I don't believe you," Sarah said, her voice trembling with the effort to stay strong. "You're lying. My father, he loved me. He would never have been involved in something like this." Thomas's eyes darkened. "Love? That's what you think. Your father loved you, yes, but not enough to keep you out of this world. He tried, yes, but in the end, he was just like everyone else in this game. He knew what was at stake, and when it came down to it, he chose to protect you in his own way, by keeping you in the dark." Sarah felt her legs go weak. Her hands shook, the flashlight falling to the floor with a dull thud. This wasn't just about Lily Matthews anymore. This was about her father's entire life. A life she had never understood. A life filled with lies, betrayal, and complicity. But Thomas wasn't done. "Do you know why Lily Matthews disappeared?" he asked, his tone suddenly lighter. "Do you know what happened to her? It wasn't an accident, Sarah. It wasn't some random kidnapping. No, Lily was part of a plan that your father and I were both involved in, and when she started to get too close to the truth, well, we had to do what needed to be done." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What plan?" she whispered, barely able to form the words. "The plan to erase the mistakes we made," Thomas replied coldly. "The mistakes we made when we decided to get too close to the edge. People who get too close to the truth are dangerous, and people who know too much have to be dealt with." His words hit Sarah like a tidal wave. Lily Matthews was part of a plan? Her mind couldn't process what Thomas was saying. Lily had been a victim, but now it seemed like she was part of a larger, more terrifying plot. A plot that involved her own family. "But why did my father protect me from all of this?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking with emotion. "Why didn't he just tell me the truth?" "Because, Sarah," Thomas said with a sigh, "he loved you. But he also knew the cost of the truth. He knew you would never be safe if you knew what he was really involved in. And now, here you are, digging up things that should have stayed buried. He was trying to keep you out of all this, away from the chaos, the destruction, the things that could ruin you." A sickening realization dawned on Sarah. She wasn't just in danger from Thomas. She was in danger from everything her father had kept hidden. The people behind this network had been watching her all along, waiting for the right moment to pull her into the fold. And now, that moment had arrived. "You're lying," Sarah said, her voice shaking but filled with defiance. "I won't let you control me. I won't be part of your lies." Thomas laughed softly, stepping closer, his face darkening with menace. "You don't have a choice, Sarah. You're already in this, whether you want to be or not. Your father made sure of that." Just as he took another step forward, the sound of footsteps echoed through the basement. Sarah turned to see a figure at the top of the stairs. Laura. "Step away from her, Thomas," Laura called out, her voice firm, but filled with an edge Sarah hadn't heard before. Thomas turned slowly, his face narrowing in frustration. "You're too late, Evans. This is bigger than both of you." Laura didn't back down. "I don't think you understand, Thomas. This ends now." For a moment, there was a tense silence. Then, without warning, Thomas moved. His arm shot out, grabbing Sarah by the wrist with an iron grip. "No one gets away," he growled. Laura rushed down the stairs, pulling out her gun. "Let her go, Thomas." Thomas smirked, tightening his grip on Sarah's arm. "You think you can stop this? You think you can stop what's already been set in motion?" In that moment, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her body frozen with fear. She was trapped, caught between Thomas and the truth that was slowly coming into focus. She couldn't run. She couldn't escape. Everything had changed. The tension in the basement was suffocating. Sarah's mind was racing, her body paralyzed by fear as Thomas's grip tightened around her wrist. Every instinct screamed at her to break free, but his hold was like iron, cold and unyielding. She could hear the sound of Laura's footsteps coming down the stairs, but there was no way out now. The room felt smaller, the shadows darker and the air heavier with the weight of secrets that had been buried for far too long. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as Thomas leaned in close, his breath cold against her skin. "You really think you can stop this, Evans?" Thomas growled, his eyes flicking toward Laura as she descended into the basement. "You can't even begin to comprehend what you're up against. This isn't just about Lily Matthews. This is about something much bigger, something you both have no control over." Laura's voice rang out with authority, her gun now pointed at Thomas. "Let her go, Thomas. Now this ends here." Thomas smirked, his grip on Sarah's wrist unyielding. "You don't get it, do you? You can't stop what's already in motion. You're just two people trying to undo what's been set in motion for years." Sarah felt a wave of panic rise within her. She was trapped, caught between Thomas and the abyss of the truth she had uncovered. Her father had been involved in something much darker than she could have ever imagined, and now she was standing at the precipice of it all. Her eyes darted between Thomas and Laura. Laura's face was set in determination, but there was something else in her eyes, a fear of what might happen next. They both knew that this wasn't just a simple standoff. Thomas was more than a man with power. He was part of something that reached far beyond them, something that could destroy everything they had ever known. "I'm not afraid of you," Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. She had to face this, no matter how terrifying it seemed. She couldn't let her fear control her anymore. Thomas chuckled darkly. "You should be." He pulled Sarah closer, his body pressing against hers, his grip on her wrist like a vice. "You're in this now, Sarah. You can't run from it. Not anymore." Before Sarah could respond, Laura stepped forward, her gun raised. "Let her go, Thomas. This isn't the way out for you." Thomas hesitated for a brief moment as though weighing his options. He looked at Laura, then back at Sarah, and a dark realization seemed to dawn in his eyes. "This doesn't have to go this way," Thomas said, his voice suddenly low, almost contemplative. "You think you have the power to stop this. You think you can tear down everything I've built, but you don't understand. You never will." Sarah's pulse raced. "Built? What did you build, Thomas?" she demanded, her voice rising with the weight of the question. "You want to know the truth?" Thomas said, stepping back just slightly, his gaze shifting between Laura and Sarah. "The truth is this. You and I are the same. We're both caught in this web. Your father knew it. He didn't just try to protect you. He tried to protect himself, too. He knew this wasn't just about Lily. This is bigger. Much bigger." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to comprehend what Thomas was saying. "What do you mean?" Thomas leaned in, his voice almost a whisper. "The network. It controls everything. Money, power, influence, and we, your father, Lily, me, we're all just pawns in a game that's been going on for decades. Your father thought he could protect you, but all he did was pull you deeper into it. And now you have no choice but to see it through." Sarah shook her head in disbelief. "This is crazy," she whispered, struggling against Thomas's hold. "I won't be part of this. I won't let you win." "I'm not asking you to join me," Thomas said softly, almost mockingly. "But this isn't a choice. You've already made it by digging around in the past, by uncovering what should have stayed hidden. Now you're a part of it. You always have been." A heavy silence fell over the room as Sarah's mind whirled. She wasn't just caught in a twisted web of secrets. She had been part of it all along. Her father's involvement, Lily's disappearance, the dark world that had been lurking beneath the surface of the town she thought she knew. And now, Thomas was telling her that there was no way out. "You're wrong," Sarah said, her voice trembling with fear and defiance. "I'm not like you. I'll never be like you." For a brief moment, it seemed like Thomas might say something else. But before he could, Laura acted. With a swift movement, Laura lunged forward, forcing her gun against Thomas's side. "Let her go now," Laura commanded, her voice steely. "This is your last chance." Thomas hesitated, his dark eyes flicking toward the gun and then back to Sarah. The tension in the room was palpable, the stillness hanging heavy as if the world itself was waiting for something to break. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. And then, with a sudden movement, Thomas released Sarah's wrist. Sarah stumbled backward, her breath ragged. She didn't want to show how terrified she was, but it was impossible to hide the fear that had taken root deep in her chest. Thomas might have released her now, but the danger wasn't over. Thomas stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "You think this is over? You think you've won? You're playing in a game that's far beyond you, Sarah, and I'll make sure you understand that soon enough." "You won't get away with this," Sarah said, her voice more confident now, though it shook from the adrenaline. "You and your network, it's over." "I'll be back," Thomas warned, his voice dark with threat. "And when I do, you won't be so lucky." With one final, lingering glance, Thomas turned and disappeared into the shadows of the basement, leaving Sarah and Laura standing there in the dim light. The room was silent now, but the air was thick with the weight of everything that had just transpired. Sarah looked at Laura, her mind reeling from everything she had just learned. The game wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but this confrontation, this moment, had given her something she hadn't had before, a sense of purpose. She wasn't going to let Thomas, or anyone else, control her. Not anymore. The basement felt quieter now, but Sarah could still hear the echoes of her heartbeat in her ears. Thomas was gone, for now, but his words, his presence, lingered in the shadows. Every inch of the basement seemed to be closing in on her, suffocating her with the weight of the truth that she had uncovered. She turned to Laura, who was still holding her gun in a steady grip, but there was something in her eyes. Something Sarah couldn't quite place. It was the same determination, the same strength she had always seen in Laura. But now there was a flicker of doubt. They both knew that the confrontation had only been a temporary victory. "He'll be back," Sarah said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. "And when he comes back, it won't just be him. He's part of something much bigger than we ever imagined. This network, it controls everything." Laura nodded slowly, lowering her gun. "I know," she said, her voice tight. "But we can't let fear dictate what we do next. You're right. We've uncovered something much bigger than we thought, and it's going to take everything we've got to stop it. We're in this together, Sarah. We can't let them win." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to push back the fear that was clawing at her chest. I don't know how we stop them. Thomas is a part of this dark web, and I've already seen how far they're willing to go. They've been pulling the strings for years. I don't even know who we can trust anymore." Laura stepped forward, her hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder. "We start by taking back control. You've done the hardest part, finding the truth. Now, we use that to expose them. We can't do this alone, but together, we might have a chance." The weight of her words settled over Sarah, and for the first time since she discovered the hidden room, she felt something she hadn't before. Hope. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. They could fight back. They could bring this network into the light. Laura moved toward the hidden room's entrance, scanning the space around them. "Let's get out of here," she said. "We need to regroup, gather more intel, and figure out our next move. Thomas will be expecting us to make a mistake, and we can't give him that satisfaction." Sarah followed Laura up the stairs, back into the main part of the house. The house that had once been a sanctuary for her now felt like a prison, its walls hiding dark secrets that would never again be ignored. Her eyes swept over the space as they moved through it, taking in the photographs on the walls, the furniture, the rooms she had once called her own. It all seemed so wrong now. Everything had changed. As they walked out of the house, the front door closing softly behind them, Sarah realized just how far she had come. She had entered this journey as a daughter searching for answers about her father's mysterious past. But now, she was someone else entirely. Someone who knew the truth. Someone who couldn't ignore the darkness any longer. They drove in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging heavily in the air. Laura's eyes stayed focused on the road ahead, But Sarah could tell she was thinking just as deeply as she was. They didn't need to say much. Both of them knew what was at stake. Both of them knew that whatever came next could change their lives forever. The warehouse. The address Thomas had left behind, Safe House 7th Avenue, was their next destination. It was clear now that it was more than just a safe house. It was the heart of the network. The place where Thomas and his people had been operating in the shadows for years. The place where Sarah's father had been caught in the web, a pawn in a much bigger game. But as Sarah's thoughts turned to the safe house, something else gnawed at her. A question that had been lingering in the back of her mind since she'd discovered the hidden room in the basement. What if her father had known about the safe house all along? What if, in his attempt to protect her, he had been hiding something even darker than she had realized? Could her father have been involved in the very network that Thomas was a part of? And if so, what did that mean for Sarah now? She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she was seeking were buried deeper than she could imagine. The closer she got to the truth, the more tangled everything became. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized just how little she truly knew. Hours later, they arrived at the safe house, an old, crumbling warehouse on the edge of town, tucked away behind a line of trees. It was the kind of place that looked abandoned, forgotten by the world. But Sarah knew better now. This was the heart of it all, the place where the network had been operating in the shadows. The night was quiet, the air still, but there was an electric charge in the atmosphere. Sarah could feel it, the sense that something big was about to happen, something that would either break them or set them free. "We go in fast," Laura said, her voice low but steady. "We don't know how many people are inside. We'll take it one step at a time." Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm ready." Together, they approached the warehouse, the shadows around them growing darker with each step. Sarah could feel her heart racing, but there was no turning back now. They had come this far. And now it was time to finish what they had started. As they reached the entrance, Sarah's eyes locked onto the door in front of them. It was cracked open, just a sliver of light visible from inside. But Sarah knew that this wasn't just another door. This was the doorway to everything. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to confront the truth, no matter what it cost her. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the night sky. It was a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time, a decaying structure that had once been a hub of activity, now abandoned and silent. But Sarah knew better. It wasn't abandoned. It was the center of the storm. The place where everything had started, where the network had been woven together, and where her father's secrets would be exposed. She could feel the weight of everything pressing on her as she and Laura approached the building. The fear, the uncertainty, and the haunting realization that they were about to walk into the heart of the darkness. The feeling of dread was suffocating, but Sarah couldn't turn back now. She had come too far to stop. "Are you ready?" Laura asked, her voice low but steady as she looked at Sarah, the flashlight in her hand casting a faint glow on her face. Sarah nodded, her throat dry, but her resolve stronger than ever. "I have to be." Together, they approached the entrance of the warehouse. The air around them was thick with tension, the silence pressing in on them as if the night itself were holding its breath. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the dark, cavernous space inside. The faint smell of mildew and dust filled the air, but beneath it, Sarah could sense something else, something deeper, something more sinister. As they stepped inside, the darkness seemed to close in around them. The shadows stretched long across the floor, twisting and turning in the dim light from their flashlights. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily in the silence, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every instinct in her body screamed that this wasn't just a warehouse, it was a trap, a place designed to keep people in and the truth hidden away. They moved carefully, quietly, their eyes scanning every corner of the vast space. The walls were lined with old, rusted equipment. Metal shelves and crates stacked high covered in layers of dust. But there was something else, something more purposeful hidden among the debris. "Stay close," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible over the silence. "We don't know how many people are here." Sarah nodded, her eyes darting around the room. The further they went, the more the space felt like a labyrinth. Every turn, every corner, led to more darkness. But Sarah knew they couldn't stop now. They had to find the answers. They had to find out what Thomas and his network had been hiding. And then, as they rounded a corner, they saw it. At the far end of the warehouse, a large wooden door stood, its surface scarred with age and wear. The dim light from their flashlights revealed a symbol etched into the wood, a symbol that sent a chill through Sarah's spine. It was the same symbol she had seen in her father's journals, the same symbol that had been tied to the network all along. She had seen it before, in the photograph of her father and Thomas, in the documents hidden in the basement. It was the emblem of the group, a shadowy network that had controlled so much of her life without her ever knowing. "This is it," Laura whispered, her voice tight with anticipation. "This is where it all ends." They approached the door, their steps measured and deliberate. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest as they reached for the handle. But just as Laura touched the door, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, the unmistakable sound of someone approaching. Before Sarah could react, the door swung open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. "Going somewhere?" The voice was smooth, calm, almost mocking. It was Thomas. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two other men, large, imposing figures, their faces obscured by shadows. Sarah's heart sank. They had been found. "Did you really think you could just walk in here and take everything down?" Thomas asked, his voice cold and filled with disdain. "You're playing in a game that's much bigger than you, Sarah. Much bigger than your father ever realized." Laura stepped forward, her hand resting on her gun. "We're not here to play games, Thomas," she said, her voice sharp. "We're here to end this." Thomas smiled, a cruel smile that sent a wave of dread through Sarah's chest. "You think you can end this? You've only just begun to understand what's really going on. Your father thought he could protect you. He thought he could stop it. But he was just another pawn." "Stop," Sarah said, her voice shaking with the weight of his words. "You're lying. My father tried to protect me. He wasn't part of this." Thomas's smile faded, replaced with a cold, calculating expression. "Your father wasn't just protecting you, Sarah. He was protecting himself. He was part of this network. He knew exactly what we were doing. He just didn't have the strength to finish it. But you have the chance to make a choice." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What choice?" Thomas's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating look. "You're standing at the crossroads, Sarah. You can walk away and live in ignorance like your father did. Or you can join us, become part of the network, be a part of something bigger than yourself. Your father had the chance, but he failed. Now, it's your turn." Sarah's mind was spinning, her heart racing as she tried to process the enormity of what Thomas was saying. The network, the symbol, the power, it was all tied together in a way she hadn't fully understood before. Her father had been part of it, and now she was being asked to join it. But she knew one thing for sure. She would never become part of this. Not after everything she had learned. Not after everything Thomas had done. "No," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I won't be a part of this, and I'll stop you. I'll expose everything you've done." Thomas's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you can stop us? You think you have the power to bring this down? You're just one person, Sarah. One person who's in way over her head." Before Sarah could respond, the two men behind Thomas lunged forward, grabbing Laura and forcing her back against the wall. The sudden move left Sarah momentarily stunned, but she quickly regained her composure. "Get away from her!" Sarah shouted, but Thomas only laughed. "You don't get to make the rules anymore, Sarah," Thomas said coldly. This is our game now, and it's too late for you to change the outcome." But just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The flash of red and blue lights sliced through the darkness outside the warehouse. Thomas's smirk faltered. "What is this?" he growled, turning toward the entrance. The sirens grew closer, and then, suddenly, the front doors of the warehouse burst open, and a team of officers poured in, weapons drawn. "We've got you surrounded," a voice called out from the entrance, the sound of it carrying through the warehouse. "Drop your weapons now!" Thomas turned toward his men, his expression filled with disbelief. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be happening." The officers advanced, their guns trained on the network members. Thomas's men hesitated, unsure of what to do. But it was too late. The trap had been set, and the truth, which had been buried for so long, was finally coming to light. As Sarah watched the officers move in, she realized that this was it, the end of the network, the end of the darkness that had controlled her life for so long. But as Thomas was led away in cuffs, one thought lingered in Sarah's mind. Was this really the end, or just the beginning of something even darker? The sound of sirens and flashing lights were the only things that broke the heavy silence in the warehouse. As the officers moved through the space, cuffing Thomas and his men, Sarah's mind was still racing. She stood there, unable to fully process what had just happened. They had won. Thomas was arrested. The network had been exposed, but it felt incomplete. Laura stood beside her, still tense, her hand resting on her gun. She, too, seemed lost in thought, her eyes scanning the chaos around them. The officers were doing their job, but there was an air of disbelief in the room. No one had expected this outcome. Not like this. Not tonight. Sarah turned to Laura, her voice low. "Is it really over?" Laura looked at her, her expression unreadable. "I don't know. It should be. But something tells me this isn't the last we'll hear of this. This isn't just about Thomas. He's part of a much larger network, and those kinds of people don't just disappear overnight." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the truth settle over her. Thomas may have been captured, but the people behind this network were still out there. The darkness didn't end with him. The revelation that her father had been involved, that her family had been connected to this dangerous web, it all still haunted her. The walls of the warehouse may have come down, but the weight of everything she had learned pressed heavily on her chest. As the officers moved toward the exit, one of them approached Sarah and Laura. "We've got Thomas and his men under control," he said, his voice grim. "But we've got a long road ahead of us. There's a lot to untangle here, and it's going to take time. We're going to need your help. You're going to have to testify, Sarah. Your father's involvement, everything you've uncovered, it's all part of this now." Sarah felt her stomach twist. She had always thought of her father as a protector, as someone who had kept her safe from the world. But the truth was so much darker than that. He had been part of this network, part of the darkness she had spent her entire life unaware of. "Do you think I'll be safe?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "After all of this, do you think I'm safe?" The officer hesitated for a moment before answering, his expression grave. "You're going to have to be careful. There are people out there who don't take kindly to their secrets being exposed. You're a target now, Sarah. We'll do everything we can to protect you, but you need to stay vigilant. And you need to tell us everything you know. The more information we have, the better chance we have of stopping this for good." Laura placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. We'll figure this out. We'll take them down. Together." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only just beginning. The truth about her father, about Lily Matthews, about the network, everything had come to light, but there were still so many unanswered questions. And in the back of her mind, there was one question that kept haunting her. Was her father a victim, or had he been an active participant in the web of lies and deceit? The next few days passed in a blur of police interrogations, meetings with detectives, and hours spent going over the evidence. Sarah tried to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting back to the warehouse, to the arrest of Thomas, to the things she had uncovered about her father's involvement. Every piece of evidence, every journal entry, every clue, it all pointed to the same unsettling truth. Her father had been part of something dark, and that truth was harder to accept than anything else. But as the days wore on, something else began to surface. Something that had been buried beneath the chaos of the arrest. The people behind the network, the ones who had pulled the strings for so long, they weren't finished. Thomas may have been a key player, but he was just one part of a much larger system. And the thought of it made Sarah sick to her stomach. She sat at her desk, the stack of police files in front of her, trying to piece together the final puzzle. The more she read, the more questions arose. There were connections that went beyond Thomas, beyond her father. The network was vast, its influence reaching farther than Sarah could have ever imagined. The police had made progress, but they were just scratching the surface. The door to her office opened and Laura stepped inside, her face drawn with exhaustion. "We need to talk," she said, her voice heavy. Sarah looked up, nodding. "About what?" "The safe house," Laura said, her eyes serious. "I've been digging through the records, talking to the team. There's more we need to uncover. The safe house wasn't just a place for Thomas and his men to hide out. It was a hub, a place where they planned everything. The disappearances, the manipulation, the control. We thought we had it all when we took down Thomas, but the real story is still out there. And there's someone pulling the strings who hasn't been caught." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Who?" Laura paused, her face pale. "That's what we need to find out. And we need your help. Your father's journals. They hold more than just his personal thoughts. They might be the key to understanding who's really behind this." The realization hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. "You think my father knew who was behind all of this? You think he knew who was really in charge?" Laura nodded slowly. "I think he did, and I think he tried to stop them, but I also think he got caught up in something he couldn't control." Sarah's mind reeled with the implications of Laura's words. Her father had been involved, yes, but was he a victim of this network? Or had he been part of it all along? The uncertainty made her stomach churn. "I'll go through the journals again," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. "I'll find something that will lead us to them, whoever they are." Laura gave her a small, supportive smile. "I know you will, and I'll be right here every step of the way." Later that night, Sarah sat alone in her office, the journals spread out before her. She was determined to find answers. The pages had already revealed so much, but there had to be something she missed, something her father had left behind for her to find. As she flipped through the pages, one line stood out, buried deep within the text. "They will come for you, just as they came for me. There's no escape, but you must never stop fighting. Never give in." The words chilled Sarah to her core. Whoever they were, whoever had been behind all of this, they were still out there. And Sarah realized with a sinking feeling in her gut that her fight was far from over. The next few days were a whirlwind of investigations, interrogations, and the relentless pursuit of answers. Sarah knew the truth now, the darkness that had lurked beneath her family's surface for so long. The network, the hidden world her father had been a part of, and the terrifying reality that had been buried away had finally come to light. But it wasn't over. The network's far-reaching influence still cast a long shadow, and though Thomas and his men had been captured, there were still powerful figures hiding in the darkness. The fight wasn't over. Sarah stood at the precipice of everything she had uncovered: her father's past, her own role in the tangled web, and the choices that had led her to this point. She had been part of something far bigger than herself, but now, with the truth in her hands, she had a chance to change the narrative. As Sarah looked toward the future, she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't back down. she would fight for the truth, for justice, and for the people whose lives had been shattered by the darkness. She had been forced to confront the worst of her family's secrets, but now she was ready to expose the rest of it. And no matter how dangerous it was, Sarah would never stop fighting. The darkness might have claimed her family for years, but she would be the one to bring it to the light. Thank you for joining us on this journey beneath the surface, where the darkest secrets are brought to light. If you found this story chilling and gripping, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. What do you think happened in the end for Sarah and the network? Were there more secrets left uncovered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, stay tuned, because the truth is out there, hidden in plain sight. We'll see you in the next video. Beneath the surface, the dark side of crime.